We all heard the story about coal, right? It was supposed to be on its way out, a fossil fuel from a bygone era, getting pushed aside by cleaner, newer energy. It seemed like a simple story, a slow fade to black. But as we're about to find out, the reality is, well, it's a whole lot more complicated.
Yeah, this was supposed to be a relic, a museum piece. But the digging hasn't stopped. In fact, in some places, it's actually picking up speed. So what on earth is going on? Why is the world's dirtiest fuel suddenly making a comeback?
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the story we all thought was true, the long goodbye. Then we get to the plot twist, an unexpected comeback. After that, we'll explore what this means for coal's new identity. And finally, we're going to face the music with the climate reality check. Okay, let's dive into part one, the long goodbye. For the last decade or so, the conventional wisdom, the story everyone agreed on, was that coal was in a terminal decline. It was just a matter of when, not if. And there was a really good reason for that narrative. Just look at this number. In 2024, burning coal was responsible for over 40% of all energy-related CO2 emissions on the entire planet. That single statistic right there is the engine driving the global push to leave it behind.
And for a while, it really looked like the plan was working perfectly. The transition away from coal was being fueled by a few key things. First, this massive explosion in renewable energy, especially wind and solar out of China. Second, the promise of a flood of cheap liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to act as a replacement. And finally, you had real policies in developed countries to just shut their old coal plants down for good.
All the projections were pointing in one direction. You looked at the forecasts, and they all told the same story. Coal's piece of the global energy pie was just going to keep shrinking. The path seemed totally clear. But then, the script got flipped.
And that brings us to part two, where the plot thickens. An unexpected comeback. All of a sudden, a couple of major shocks hit the global system, and they started rewriting coal's final chapter, basically breathing new life into this old fuel.
Now, if you want to understand coal's comeback, you have to understand this one key idea. It's called gas-to-coal switching. It's actually pretty simple. When the price of natural gas shoots through the roof, power plants that have the ability to burn either will switch to the cheaper option, and that cheaper option was coal. This one dynamic is the key to this whole story.
So what caused this big global switch back to coal? It was a perfect storm, really. Two massive, unexpected events hitting at the same time. Geopolitical shocks that sent energy markets spinning, and a sudden, massive surge in demand for electricity.
Let's just walk through that first driver. The beginning of 2026 was just chaotic for energy markets. First, a drone strike hits Qatar's main LNG facility, and bam, 20% of the world's supply just vanishes overnight. Then, a conflict in the Persian Gulf starts disrupting tanker shipments. So what happens? Natural gas becomes incredibly expensive and hard to get. And suddenly, old reliable coal starts to look pretty good, which you can see in its price just soaring. At the exact same time, you've got the AI revolution kicking into high gear. This explosion in artificial intelligence and the giant data centers needed to run it created this unbelievable, almost unquenchable thirst for electricity. In the US alone, this power demand was a huge reason why coal power actually went up by nearly 20% in 2025. I mean, that's a stunning reversal of a trend that had been going on for years.
This quote from an industry publication, CoalZoom, it just nails it. It says, "Coal's second win depends on someone else losing theirs." Think about that. Coal isn't winning because it's suddenly better. It's winning by default, because other energy sources are getting knocked out, whether it's by war or supply chain chaos, or just not being able to keep up with this crazy new demand.
So, all of this brings us to part three, coal's new identity. You've got this long-term trend of decline crashing head-on into a short-term, shocking comeback. What does that actually mean for coal's job in our power grid? Well, it's morphing into something completely different.
To get this, you gotta look at the before and after. Coal's old job was what we call baseload power. It was the steady, 24/7, always-on backbone of the grid. But its new job? It's all about being a backup. A strategic reserve you call up from the bench only when you're in a pinch.
And here is the great paradox, the really wild part of this story. The rapid growth of renewables, the very thing that was supposed to kill coal, is actually creating this new job for it. See, when your grid runs on a lot of wind and solar, your power supply goes up and down with the weather. So what do you do when the sun sets or the wind stops blowing? To keep the lights on, countries are looking back to their old coal plants to be that balancing resource that guarantees you don't have blackouts.
And you can see how this new role for coal is being locked in by some really powerful forces. Just take a look at this quote from the U.S. Interior Secretary back in 2025. It shows you how priorities are shifting. The immediate pressure to win the AI race and just have enough power, for some leaders, is starting to outweigh those longer-term climate goals.
And that, of course, leads us to our final and, let's be honest, pretty sobering section, the climate reality check. Because even if coal's job is changing, its effect on our atmosphere, well, that hasn't changed one bit. Our continued reliance on coal, even as a backup, has led to a really stark conclusion. The 2026 global energy outlook was brutally honest. The goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, it's just not plausible anymore. A core target of the Paris Agreement now looks like a casualty of our current energy reality.
So, where does all this leave us? Coal was supposed to be a bridge to a past we were leaving behind. But in this incredibly unstable world full of energy shocks and new demands, you have to ask a tough question. Has that bridge somehow become a crutch? One that we know we shouldn't lean on, but for now we just can't seem to throw away.